Tansei, Minotakosin, Kakinao Totimak, Kapapama Peminat Nikasuskwayo Nitisinikason, Ni Mama Judy Adams, Iside Gasso Ochike Sipi Ni Itutimak. I said hello, good evening. My Cree name is Flying Overhead in Circles Eagle Woman. And my mother is Judy Adams from Fisher River Cree Nation. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that I am here in Winnipeg, as we affectionately call Muddy Waters. And I should note that it's the color it is because of clay particles suspended in that water, which makes it the color that it is. We are on the land of my ancestors in Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Nehewe, Oji-Cree, Assiniboine, Dene, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'll also note that I live on the former Goulet family farmland. I also acknowledge that Winnipeg's water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, and that my survival is indebted to them. Some housekeeping. Thank you for attending the Manitoba Craft Council Spring Talk Series, co-sponsored by MAWA, Mentoring Artists for Women's Art. The Manitoba Craft Council was founded in 1978 as Manitoba's only not-for-profit arts organization dedicated exclusively to contemporary craft. In these challenging times, the Manitoba Craft Council is proud to create programming to help artists, craftspeople, and other makers adapt to the rapid and continuing changes in our community. So I'm going to be talking for about 45 minutes, and please type any questions that you may have in the chat, and then I will try to answer them as best I can in the Q&A after that. Okay, so the term Miskinau that you see on my screen is a Neheo word described by William Dumas, a Cree language speaker from South Indian Lake, Manitoba. Miskinau is the lifelong journey from birth to a child to adult, a path that you are guided by others who help you recognize your purpose for being here and develop the gifts for feeling that purpose. My talk tonight is about finding my Miskinau and reclaiming my spirit through clay. So Miskinau is about that lifelong journey, and I'm including members of my family on my dad's side and my mom's side. They started me on this journey, and same with all my relations. These are the people whose blood memory run through me. Their life experience and teachings have shaped my life. On my dad's side, you see in the blue, Sophie Spence, her daughter, Olive Adams, who lived until 107. Sitting in her lap is my twin sister, Kelly, my father, Leslie, and the child that looks grumpy and solemn, that would be me. Down below, the far bottom person is my great-grandmother, Nora Cromarty. Her daughter is Melvina Sabston, and my mother, Judy. And there's my sister, Kelly, and her daughter, Jody. And while my dad's side of the family always acknowledged that they were Indigenous and were proud of who they are and where they came from, my mom's side of the family did not feel the same way. So I was not raised with my culture. I should also note that Sophie Spence was one of my only relatives that I know of that went to residential school. The rest were able to turn their backs on treaty and move to Selkirk and live in the town without having to worry about going to residential schools. So I attended Concordia University, and it was here that I was introduced to the writing of Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto. Science, Technology, and the Social Feminist in the late 20th century. I was particularly interested in how the cyborg was free of historical baggage, such as sexism, racism, and discrimination, hierarchy, and patriarchy. I could combine my interest in the natural world with technology and create cyborgs, part creature, part machine, free of classifications. And, what I failed to mention about my family is that it's because of them that I'm the artist that I am today. I'm an artist, an educator, an activist, and a mentor. I'm a multidisciplinary artist, specialized in social activist art, and my focus is on the dynamic relationship between nature, the living, and technology progress. I create work that explores technology and how it relates to identity and knowledge. My process is to start with an idea and then choose a medium that best represents that idea. So I work in video, installation, drawing, painting, photography, ceramics, welding, printmaking, kinetic art, adornment art, and public art. So I realize that this is a very large list of mediums, but really I am walking in the footsteps of my ancestors. The women in my life in particular had to be skilled in so many endeavors, such as setting up camp, trapping, gathering, tanning, sewing, cooking, weaving, and many art practices. Then these are just to name a few. I didn't even talk about childbirth or child rearing. But in this talk, I will be focusing on my clay work in particular. And if you're interested in seeing more of my art practice, you can go to my website at caseyadams.net or follow me on Instagram or Facebook. Okay, so while I was at Concordia University, I met an important person in my life, Kathy Mattis, who is a curator, well known here in Manitoba. And it was through her that she helped me start to recognize that my culture should be an important part of my practice. So in this slide, I made these white infant cyborgs before they develop their technological skills. These mythological creatures have the potential to help humanity or destroy it. So much like a caterpillar changes into a butterfly, or a Borg from Star Trek forcibly transforming individual beings into drones by injecting nanoprobes into their bodies and surgically augmenting them with cybernetic components. So for me, it was really looking at technology critically. Here is a cyborg that is at its adolescent stage before they develop, at its adolescent stage. And when the viewer waves its hand over the cyborg, it flashes and communicates to the person. Whether or not it's a good cyborg or a bad cyborg is still on the fence on that one. This is called Cyborg Living Space. It was created in response of 9/11 and the rise of the DIY home decor with Martha Stewart as its cult leader. I was commenting on the need to isolate oneself from the world, create a safe, clean space, a futuristic space with surveillance equipment and cyborgs to keep you company. And if you look at this work at this point in time, I was still trying to search out who I was, where I came from, and trying to be okay with that. And you'll notice that this space is lacking any cultural reference whatsoever. This is Cyborg chicken eggs. It's a piece that comments on genetically modified foods. I should note that I met some incredible Indigenous artists at this point in time and curators who impacted the trajectory of my career, in particular, Cheryl Lirendell. She was the first Indigenous artist who talked about how I had rights to learn about my culture, even though I wasn't raised in it. her best advice was, you know, Irish people go to Ireland all the time to learn about their roots. So there shouldn't be anything stopping me from learning about my own heritage. And I'm grateful for her teachings. Same with Laurie Blondeau, Faye Heavyshield, Leanne Martin, Candice Hopkins, Skawanati, Kent Monkman, Peter Moran, Steve Loft, Nadia Muir, Australian artists Jenny Fraser, Richard Bell, and Christian Thompson. These are just a few of the people that I came in contact with. And they were artists who were proud of their culture, and they were incorporating their heritage into their art. And it's at this point in time that I started creating Cyborg hybrids. You can look that on my website. But at this point in time, I'm still working with clay. And for me, clay has always been a connection to nature. Okay. So I experienced success creating artworks that included technology, simple electronic devices, sensors, or surveillance equipment. So following Western thinking, the natural next move was to step up my technological knowledge by learning how to program and purchase cutting edge technology. Like I said, I did not grow up with my culture, but I felt that my blood memory was strong within me. For example, the first time I touched clay, which was at Concordia University, which seems odd to me that I didn't play with clay when I was a child. But the moment I touched clay, it was like coming home. I understood it. I excelled in it right away. It touched me more than any other medium that I had ever worked with before. And it wasn't until years later, through my friend Leona Starr, that she introduced the idea of blood memory. And it's like monarch butterflies. They have blood memory imprinted running through their DNA. It explains why they never meet their parents, but yet they know exactly where to migrate to. So us beings, it's ridiculous to think that we don't have blood memory, and scientists have now shown and proven that humans actually do have blood memory. So while I was thinking about this cutting edge technology, I found myself at a crossroads. And I knew that the road ahead, using technology as the main source of my knowledge or the creation of my artwork, I knew that was important, but do I keep going forward with newer technology, or do I look back at where I came from? And so culture is a great separator that decides which direction a person will go when faced with a fork in the road. And so this was really particularly true for me. I came to realize that I needed to understand where I came from. I needed to understand my culture, the creation process of their objects, their cultural material objects. And so I started to shift in my direction. And back in 2000, I took a course at the Manitoba Museum to learn a little bit more of my culture, because I wasn't getting it from my family. And it was led by Dr. Lee Sims to teach others the fascinating ancient technology of clay vessels made by the first people of this territory. And I'm very grateful for taking that course. And I have nothing but respect for the people who created and led this course. But ultimately, it was flawed because of its colonial structure. When you are in a fish tank, and the fish tank represents the colonial structure, you don't realize that you're in this fish tank. So it was kind of like that analogy. It was in the basement of the Manitoba Museum. It was being taught by people who are not Indigenous. There was no spiritual aspect attached to it, and there was no land-based learning attached to it either. It was all structured where we used commercial clay. So that connection to land and waters wasn't there. And I walked away from that experience where I couldn't understand the creation of these vessels and why they looked the way they did, why they were so coarse. While the intentions were great and the intentions were definitely there, it didn't resonate with me, and I sort of packed it away in my memory. Many years later, 11 years later, I brought back those teachings that I had learned at the museum, and I used them in an exhibition Lisa Myers had curated. And this is called The Gifts. I created a series of Indigenous pottery reminiscent of the pots made by my ancestors. And at the time, I was really thinking about diabetes. My mother was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. The realization that I too could potentially get diabetes, but also researching about it, I came to understand that the UN had done a report back in 2010, I think it was, that 50% of the Indigenous population around the world had type 2 diabetes. And that didn't include people who were pre-diabetic like myself. So that had a real impact on me. And that is where I started thinking about my body and my community's bodies as these vessels. And these vessels aren't fired, they're raw in their raw state. And then I put the five gifts from the foods that were introduced to us: lard, sugar, salt, milk, flour. Did I get them all? I can't remember. Lard, salt, sugar, milk, flour. So these pieces are placed on grandfather rocks. Oftentimes these grandfather rocks are used in ceremony. So ceremonies holding up these vessels, but inside there are these foods that are ultimately destroying our bodies. So the milk just destroyed the vessel completely. The salt changed the composition of the clay, etc. This is Birch Bark Limited. I created this in 2012 for the Winnipeg Art Gallery's 100th anniversary exhibition. And I think there were 32 birch bark trees, and it's made out of porcelain. And if you look really closely, you can see that there's glowing parts, and those are really thin pieces of porcelain. And it has birch bark biting designs in it. And each birch bark each tree had a corporate logo within the tree. So you can see the CBC logo, but there was Royal Bank, Shell Oil. They're all corporate logos. And this is the closest to a self-portrait that I had done, and really talked about where I was at that point in time. So I was learning a lot more about who I am and where I come from. A special thanks to people like Leona Starr, her husband Brennan Manukisic, Stuart Deneme, Leah Gazan, Amy Craft. A lot of these people were guiding me towards ceremony and guiding me towards learning about my culture at this point in time. And so the top part represents birch bark, which is technology used a lot by my ancestors. And then the bottom part represents the white box that I exist within in terms of as being an artist. We often think of these institutions as white space buildings and having to fit within these white space boxes. And the pillar represented that artist side of me and that world that I existed within. And then the trees represented my culture and learning about it, but also recognizing that as a consumer, I'm also part of the problem in terms of destroying our planet. And if you notice that the trees have no roots. So at that point in time, that was really a great indicator of where I was in my career, of understanding who I am and where I come from. So here, I was invited by Amy Craft. She invited me to a Nibe gathering, which is a water gathering. If you can imagine like having a conference, but instead of in a conference building, it's out on the land by the water in a teaching lodge. And elders and educators and students were brought together, and community leaders, to talk, discuss, and learn about the health and welfare of water, or Nibe. And Aimee, who's a lawyer, environmental lawyer, she, Aboriginal lawyer, she understood that part of the teaching was also about incorporating the art practices, and that she brought me in to talk about water in a visceral way. And so I had 200 of these vessels, these pinch pots that I'd imprinted imagery into them. You see here, they're braided. That's actually my hair braided, but it looks like sweetgrass. And I had all these vessels, and I brought them to the gathering, and we did a community performance piece. And I asked everyone, first I asked an elder to talk about water, and then I asked everyone to think about everything that they had learned about water. And I had taken some water from the river that was next to us. And I asked everyone to take a vessel and fill their cup with water, and then place the vessel down on the ground. And what happened, and that was the only instructions that they were given. And what was extraordinary was that everyone just started working, started picking up the vessels, putting water in the vessels, and then placing them down on the land. And then without saying anything, they went and picked up another and would do it again. And we created the circle that just kept going around and around. It was really beautiful. It was magical. But what was even more magical was they ended up creating a turtle that also kind of looked like a round lodge, a learning lodge. So it really felt like ceremony. It felt like that we were coming together as a community. And this is exactly what Amy envisioned, was this idea of connecting us together and creating a connection to land and water. It still gives me chills when I think about it. And then I love talking about this. This is Grant Goltz, the Manitoba Craft Council, and Jenny Western decided to create an exhibition where they would bring Indigenous female artists to learn about Indigenous pottery. And I went down to the States to meet Grant and to learn from him. And he, incidentally, was one of the people instrumental in creating that Manitoba Museum workshop that I had been a part of. But this time, it was all done on the land. Grant took us out to harvest clay. Then he showed us how to process the clay. And then he showed us how to build the vessels. And we were using his tools, all made from the land. And he was showing us how to build vessels. And he experimented on how these vessels were made. Because at this point in time, archaeologists and anthropologists all agreed that here in Manitoba, nobody holds that knowledge anymore. So Grant is this wonderful person who just wanted to understand because has a great appreciation for Indigenous knowledge. Also, we went to look at the University of Winnipeg's sherd collection, their ceramic collection. And we also were introduced to Kevin Brownlee, who is Métis from Norway House. His family's from Norway House. He's a Métis archaeologist. He's the head curator now after Dr. Lee Sims retired. And so we were learning, land-based learning about Indigenous pottery. So it's the same content that I had gotten from the Manitoba Museum before, but this time it was actually done on the land. And it was a completely different experience. So the research that we do as Indigenous people is ceremony that allows us a raised level of consciousness and insight into our world. So the objects, I started to understand the richness of our material culture, that the work of the ancestors went beyond function, that the objects held knowledge. It held land knowledge, clan or family knowledge. It had spiritual beliefs embedded in them. They were used in ceremonies and oftentimes were used as instruments in treaty relations with other groups. So this is the exhibition Shards that I was part of. We learned about Indigenous pottery out on the land with Grant Goltz and worked with Kevin Brownlee and the University of Winnipeg. And then we were invited to create an exhibition based on what we learned. And so this is my installation. And I ended up doing a really beautiful performance with Jamie Black. So I started to take that knowledge, and so everything that I had been learning from the Nibe gathering about water and the importance of water, and how as a female, I'm a water carrier. Being a water carrier because when I was pregnant and when women are pregnant, they carry water and they bring life. And the teachings that are always brought forward is that water is life. And so as a woman, as a mother, I carried that water. And so I was asked to be part of a landscape show at the La Maison des Artistes. And so I created this piece where you walk into the space and you look down into the vessel. And there is a video playing, and the video is footage of waterways that I've videotaped throughout Manitoba, from all the way as north as Fox Lake to the Whiteshell to here in Treaty 1 territory. So I had all these, I brought together all this water footage, and then I sang a water song. And the song plays when you come into the space. You can hear the sound and the water. And so the exhibition is all made from materials from the land, and it shows that water vessel. And so our Dene Nation is like this great river. It has been flowing before any of us can remember. We take our strength, our wisdom, and our ways from the flow and direction which has been established for us by ancestors we never knew, ancestors of 1,000 years ago. Their wisdom flows through us to our children and our grandchildren, to generations we will never know. So returning to the Nibe gathering, every year, there was a couple of years where there was a year where there was none. And then I was brought back to the Nibe gathering, but this time taking the knowledge that I learned from Grant, and I started bringing it to the Nimbe gathering, and I started teaching others because I understood the importance of carrying on this knowledge, and that this knowledge I started to get an understanding of who I am, and it started giving me strength and purpose. So it was impactful not just for myself, but it was also for the community, who are all eager to learn. And it was really exciting. They became part of my learning circle. And, you know, the understanding is that art, from an Indigenous perspective, art is not just for people who are talented. Art was a way of life. Art was a language. It talked a lot about the relationship that we have with the land and waters. Art communicated so much information and knowledge. And if you didn't create art, then it meant that you weren't able to communicate to the spirits and the ancestors. So art was an integral part of who you are as a person, which is very different than how we look at art from a Western point of view. So my goal has been about mentorship and teaching, and how art was created for everyone in the community, and that understanding that colonization, the colonial system destroyed these forms of communication and banned my ancestors from creating these beautiful objects and clothing. And it was a way of silencing our voices. But by taking up art, we are following in the steps of our ancestors and giving our spirits back. So this is an exhibition that in Montreal, the Montreal Biennale. This is a piece that I had done with Jamie Black. We did a performance about water, and you can see in these pictures, what we did was Jamie did a performance in response to water, and I enlisted the help of a group of sisters, because the whole theme of that Biennale that year was sisters. And so Jamie and I had everyone participate by taking these bowls of water, and we took water from the Lachine Canal, and we asked everyone to come and lay down the water vessels into the space. So it became another communal performance piece. And what was really amazing about this piece was that we ended up, as Jamie and I were sitting there holding hands, people who were laying down the vessels, and you can't really see it in this picture, but it ended up creating a heart, which was completely unexpected. Again, it's one of these situations where nobody was talking to one another about what it was going to look like. It all just happened organically. Really beautiful. So I believe the recovery of our people is linked to digging up the medicines of our past. And understanding our past is important to know where we come from. And so by taking clay and learning, using blood memory, using knowledge from archaeologists and anthropologists, but also talking to elders, are my way of learning about these clay methods that have disappeared. And oftentimes knowledge is shared. So there are knowledge keepers, even though our ceramics, our pottery is very different than from groups from different tribes, from different lands. There is things that can be shared and knowledge that can be shared. So right now I'm also reaching out to Indigenous artists who work with clay and learning about their knowledge and how their methods of creation were used to create their vessels, and then taking all of that information from elders and blood memory and all the research that I'm doing and bringing it together to create these clay vessels. And so I'm just I'm going to end it by saying that, you know, something that Sherry Farrell-Rosette said, that artists describe the transformative power of traditional materials that enable them to revitalize and mobilize endangered knowledge and to confront trauma and hidden histories while affirming the ongoing vitality and sovereignty of their communities. And for me, for us to move forward in a good way, we need to understand one another. We need to understand where we come from. And, you know, I think it was Carrie Miller. I just heard a statistic from her. She was talking about racism in the workplace. And she was talking about how here in Manitoba, the Indigenous population makes up 20% of the population. So that means 1 in 5 people here in Manitoba are Indigenous. And of course, we know that our populations are increasing. So that means we need to figure out how we need to come together and we need to work together. And the best way to do that, and I've always said this, is through art and its ability to engage, its ability to bring people together, its ability to heightens one's understanding oneself, a way to express oneself. So I encourage everyone out there to learn more about where you come from. And I should note that it's not just my Indigenous side that I glean my knowledge from. I'm also part British as well. And there is a definite strong history of clay making from the British Isles. So anyone who is part British, part European, they have strong traditions also of clay making and vessel making. So I encourage everybody to tap into that blood memory and find out who you are and where you come from so that we can come together as brothers and sisters, as all my relations. With that, I'm going to, 7:46. I'm going to end this discussion and take questions from the audience.
So if folks have any questions, they can enter them into the chat bar. And also thank you, Casey, for rolling with the punches with our audio issue. And thank you to everybody watching for being so patient. These little things happen. So thank you for your grace.
Should I stop sharing? Or
you can stop sharing your slideshow if you'd like, or we can leave it up.
Okay.
And if anyone has any questions, they can enter them into the chat bar at the bottom.
And you're reading them, right?
Yes, I'll be reading them out to you. And one thing I wanted to say was that I loved the art as a way of life and language, and art is part of who you are. I thought that was a really, really beautiful sentiment that I haven't heard phrased in that way before. And I really appreciated that because I think a lot of people see art as something that is for other people and maybe not for themselves. And I really appreciated you bringing that up in that phrasing. It was quite lovely.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I like going into schools and teaching children. It's because I'm also touching the teachers, because they grew up in the same kind of system I did, where art was only for Friday afternoons as a treat. And only the good artists were, celebrated, the ones that could copy things in real life, right? And so when I go into a classroom and I allow clay to allow them to express themselves for the first time often, they get so excited and they get so engaged. And suddenly they start thinking, oh, well, you know what? Art is for everybody. And maybe I need to set aside my own fears and bring it more often into the classroom. So it's really exciting.
What do you find that kids are more creative in that framework than they are within a regular art class? I've noticed that in my experience, kids tend to really respond to craft and because they're not afraid of making a mistake. And I was just curious about that with kids, if they really respond to this kind of way of teaching.
Well, to be honest with you, it's really geography has a lot to do with it. So rural kids are less afraid about art. And I don't know if it's because they're working out on the land with their families. And so they're used to working with their hands, but they are less afraid to create. And also, when they start hitting grade 4 or 5 in the city, they start to develop these prejudice towards art, that only good artists should be doing it and I'm terrible at it, blah, blah, blah. But grade 3s, 1 to 3s, magical. Yeah, it's amazing.
That's really interesting what you were saying about rural kids and working on the land. They probably just get more experience doing things with their hands, but I'd never thought about that before.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. When you're making your vessels for water ceremony, are you getting the clay from the land or are you using commercial clay?
The first couple of times that I did the first time I did one, it was before I met Grant Goltz, and I was using clay that I bought and I was adding sand to it. And then after I met Grant and did shards, I started collecting clay from the land, but then I would prepare it ahead of time. So in future sessions, like in our virtual Nibbe gathering this year, I did 2 videos on how to find and look for clay. And then the second video was how to process the clay. And the reason why we did that, we decided on this practice, was so that people can develop that relationship with land. Because it's one thing me telling you and then handing the clay over to you, but it's a different experience when you get to harvest it yourself. Because it's like when you grow vegetables for the first time in your garden, it tastes different when you grow it yourself, as opposed to going to the store and buying it.
That was a great answer. The appreciation of where it comes from and all of the labor. Yeah. So we have a question. In the light of finding the Indigenous bodies and Kamloops, is there anything that would be appropriate for ceremony or commemoration with the soil? And they were just wondering about traditions.
Yeah, so and I can only speak of my territory, because in my territory, a lot of that knowledge got lost because of the Indian Act. The clay process required getting clay from specific areas that didn't have a lot of limestone in it. So it meant going and sourcing the clay, even though most of Manitoba has clay. It also meant using ceremonial rocks to put into the clay, getting the right sand. So it was a community effort. It required harvesting, but once the Indian Act was established, you couldn't leave the reserve unless you had permission from an Indian agent, right? So a lot of the ceremonies, a lot of the ways of doing and ways of being got severely cut off. So a lot of people think, oh, well, they stopped making vessels because metal was introduced and it was a superior technology. Actually, it was the opposite. Clay is a superior technology. It's better cooking. It uses less heat. There's a whole bunch of knowledge attached to it. But it was, it was also, I like to think, part of ceremony. It was a ceremonial and a community-driven event to create clay vessels, right? And so colonization has really impacted, it had impacted the process, right? So, you know, there were a couple burial sites up in Split Lake. There was a burial site where a woman was buried with her clay vessel. And there's like actually a couple burial sites here in Manitoba that vessels were buried next to the body. So we know that it was an important part of identity and spiritual practice. In terms of the children that have been passed, you know, when I think about it, I think about how important it is to bring them back. When I think about these vessels, I think about how each child needs to have a meal to go with them. In part of here in this territory, part of our practices, when you're going home to be with the ancestors, you need to have food with you to go with. You need to have the right spiritual send off so that you can go up in a good way. And these children were denied that. So the most important thing is that they be taken away from the schools and that they be given that proper burial. And whether or not it means taking the clay from the land and building vessels, I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but I think taking clay from your territory where you are from and building vessels, I think is more important. And if anyone who wants to honor them, I say make a vessel for a child that you have in mind, and then you can bury it in honor.
Thank you so much for that really, really thoughtful answer, Casey. And the next question is, in your opinion, what is the best way to educate the next generation about the Indigenous ceramics history and their unique techniques? Where and how could we start?
Right. Well, that is something that I've been trying really hard. So the Nibe gathering, as you can see in this photo, this is just a handful of people. There's like a whole bunch of other people in the corner there. They're all surrounding me and I'm talking about it. Currently, I'm mentoring some women on how to make these vessels based on my research. I do learning through the arts, artists in the schools through Manitoba Arts Council. And I go in and I talk about these Indigenous vessels. My plan is to research more and learn more. Right now, I'm actually enrolled at the University of Winnipeg. And my plan is to actually do a research paper on it so that it can be more accessible to communities. So right now, I think it's important to teach children the innovation and the technology of clay, but also, you know, other materials as well. Quill work, weaving. There's tons of amazing technologies and innovation that children need to be learning about so that they can also move forward in a good way. I hope that answers the question.
I think it did. That was a great answer. Anybody else have any more questions? These are really great questions, folks, also. I think that might be it for questions. Thank you so much, Casey, for joining us tonight. It's always a pleasure to listen to you talk, and you have such a beautiful and thoughtful and also accessible way of talking about all of these topics. So thank you for giving us your time tonight to help us understand ceramics more, because I think a lot of us in craft know a lot about ceramics, but this is a brand new topic for a lot of us. And thank you so much for sharing that knowledge with us.
Yeah, I just want to say that, I went to school at Concordia University, and I learned about clay from an artistic point of view, but a Western point of view, right? And using clay as a medium to express my concerns or the social issues that I was interested in. But learning more about who I am and where I come from has taught me that I need to look at the world from a holistic point of view, and understanding that I am part of a giant spider web, and that the clay is part of it, the stars are part of it, the sun, the moon, the water, the plants and animals, you and me, we're all part of this giant spider web. And whatever we do to that spider web, be it extracting oil from the ground, be it clear cutting these beautiful trees from the forest, that all affects us all. It impacts each and every one of us. So I hope that people walk away today thinking about themselves within that spider web and what we can do to ensure the health and the welfare of that giant spider web, because we're all in it together. And I hope that doesn't sound too preachy, but I mean, these are some of the things that I've been learning from elders. And, you know, now that I have a son, it puts that into perspective, because it's the importance of thinking 7 generations ahead. And if we all do that, then we can ensure that the future for future generations will continue to be good and strong.
Thank you so much. And I don't think that was preachy at all. I think that was perfect, because we are part of our environment and we have to maintain it so we can continue to be part of our environment. And I think that message is really important. And thank you so much for sharing it with us, Casey.
Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do I, oh, yep.
It's on like a 10-second. Okay. It's on like a 20-second delay, so I have to wait